Hello, APUSH students. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 31 and the President of Reagan, the waning of the Cold War or the weakening of the Cold War. And we're also going to talk about events that's actually going to go into the next administration of George H.W. Bush. So we're going to talk about the background first, okay? Ronald Reagan is elected president in 1980, and one of the reasons why he's elected is because he continually pushes the point home that United States is not a respected world power anymore. What's some evidence of that? Well, number one, we know 1975, the Vietnam War is basically officially lost. All of Vietnam becomes a communist nation, okay, after so many years of fighting, okay. We also know that the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan in 1979. In 1979, there is an overthrow of the democratic, well, basically dictatorship, though, in Nicaragua, right, by the Sandinistas. We also know that there was the Iran hostage crisis, where a conservative Iranians overtook the American embassy and held over 50 American hostages for over 400 days, basically. Okay, so we have all these major events contributing to a lack of worldwide respect for the international and military power of the United States, right? Well, we have a major change going on in the 1980s as well with the Soviet Union, okay, which obviously greatly impacts the Cold War. Mikhail Gorbachev becomes president, and he institutes glasnost and perestroika, right? Glasnost, which is the opening, meaning people are allowed to speak to each other, allowed to communicate to each other. People are allowed to basically even criticize the government. Perestroika means restructuring, possibly moving away from communism in terms of economics and away from central planning, let people make more of their own decisions economically as well. So we see a large number of changes going on in the Soviet Union. President Reagan has a famous speech at the Berlin Wall. You know, it was built in the 1960s. President Kennedy had a famous speech there saying, "I am with you," to the Berliners. So Ronald Reagan comes in the 1980s and basically tells Mr. Gorbachev, if you're really about freedom, if you're really about democracy and letting people take control of their lives and make their own decisions, right, then you need to tear down this wall. Okay. So what we have here is, because of all of the changes undergone by the Soviet Union, the countries that they had traditionally controlled, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and so on, right? Those countries feel that they have more freedom to act on their own, okay? And what they do is basically overthrow the communist governments, okay? We saw many communist countries, right? We saw not many, but in 1950, 1960, in Hungary, right, Czechoslovakia, attempt to move away from communists. And we know that the Soviet Union came down on them hard and put them in the communist line. Okay. Well, not anymore. These countries are becoming independent, and the Soviet Union is not stopping them. We also have a continuation of agreements regarding nuclear weapons, nuclear testing. In 1988, there's an agreement to eliminate intermediate nuclear range forces as well, right? Continuation of, remember, SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation talks, okay? Also, in the late 80s, the Soviet Union realized that they're never going to win in Afghanistan. A large amount of money, a large amount of lives are lost, and they're still not able to control the government. They're still not able to control the people as well. So many people are saying that this was the last nail in the coffin, basically showing that the Soviet Union wasn't as powerful as they thought. And some people even called it the Soviets' Vietnam. Okay. Now, in 1991, even though this was President Reagan, right, had left office his 2 terms, and his former vice president, George H.W. Bush, became president, right, happened under his presidency, okay? There was an attempted coup. Remember, coup means a quick overthrow, quick seizure of power, by the hardliners, many people who wanted to go back to the original ideas and policies going all the way back to Stalin, and said they had become too liberal. Right? Too much glasnost, too much restructuring, too much perestroika. But what happens was the hardliners, they were not able to get any backing, right? By the army, by the people, and so on. Gorbachev realized his limitations as well, and he resigns. And really, the Soviet Union is no more. And it happened in such an anticlimactic way that really it's just a large number of men, the Politburo, right? The leaders, the political leaders of the Soviet Union, sat around at a desk at a table and just basically agreed to dissolve the Soviet Union. And it was over. Now we have the downfall of the Soviet Union. And we're going to go over, how it's going to impact the United States, because remember, so much of the focus of post-World War II was regarding stopping the spread of communism. Now that the enemy isn't there, what do we do? Okay. Well, let's take a step back a little bit and go back to the 1980s. Okay. We have another scandal, another affair. Okay. Remember, the United States is still getting over Watergate. Now we have to get over the Iran-Contra scandal. And just follow me step by step. I also have video links as well in the Google Classroom to check out so that you can understand the story or give you a little more background in the story as well. So here how it goes. President Reagan approves the sale of arms to Iran, okay, which is basically illegal. Iran is in basically a decade-long war in the 1980s with, and it should say Iraq, and I will fix that. So Iran was in a war with Iraq. I'll fix that, okay? In exchange for the arms, Iran promises to speak to the nation of Lebanon. And you're like, okay, well, what does Lebanon have to do with it? Well, Lebanon is friends with Iran, okay? And a terrorist group, right, kidnapped and held Americans hostage in Lebanon. And President Reagan said that he will never, ever negotiate with terrorists. But if he gets to bring these terrorists home, that's a major victory for him and the Republican Party. Okay? So, sorry for a second there. Okay? Had to let the dog out. Okay? Didn't want to interrupt filming. Okay? So, members of Reagan's staff, what they did is the following. They said, let's accomplish the old adage, kill two birds with one stone. Let's bring the hostages home, and at the same time, we can give money to anti-communists in Nicaragua. But the point is, it's actually illegal now to help the anti-communists, right? Or the Contras in Nicaragua, right? So what happens is Reagan's staff would sell the weapons to Iran for a large profit, okay? Because Iran was finding difficult to get weapons from anyone else in the world, okay? And we know that Iran had just taken Americans hostage a few years earlier, okay? And so they did is they took this profit and they gave it to the Contras in Nicaragua, okay? Who are the Contras? They're an anti-communist army in Nicaragua who attempted to stop a communist takeover by a group called the Sandinistas. So the Sandinistas are the communists and the Contras are the anti-communists. And what happens is America was helping out the Contras, but the Contras were basically doing a lot of what we would say bad stuff, right? Killings, torture, and so on. So Congress passed a law, let me get out of the way here, right? Which said providing weapons to the Contras was illegal, and it's called the Boland Amendment. But many conservatives, obviously in the Reagan staff, higher up, right? They said, I don't care. We're going to do this, not in a transparent manner. We're going to do this under the table. Basically, we're going to do this illegal. So you have this whole scandal here. There's this whole complicated series of events. And eventually, it gets leaked. Okay? And it goes to the press. And people investigate it. And becomes a gigantic story. And in 1987, before we had the internet and all these other cable channels, still have cable, but not as many channels, okay? There are congressional hearings every day, and there's also a commission appointed called the Tower Commission to find out what really happened. And the Tower Commission said that basically President Reagan didn't have direct knowledge of the extent of the program, okay? But he failed to supervise the National Security Council. So basically, Reagan did not know everything that was going on, but the problem is he should know something that's going on because these are the people that work for him and that are his advisors. Okay? So the congressional hearings actually led to several guilty verdicts. Okay? So you have people that were convicted of obstruction of justice, lying under oath, destroying confidential information, and many of them pled guilty and were ended up sent to jail or put on probation or other types of punishments, right? But they were all of them later pardoned by the incoming in 90 in 88, excuse me, right? President George H.W. Bush. Okay. So we see a similar action here to the Watergate scandal where President Ford, right, pardoned President Nixon even before anything could happen. Okay. So in 1988, basically, what we see here, and remember, this is right after the Iran-Contra scandal, right? Let me get out of here. Okay. So in 1988, you see that it really didn't appear to hurt the Republican Party because George Bush is able to win the presidency quite easily, okay, over Michael Dukakis and another challenger named Lloyd Benson, okay? So the electoral vote wasn't even close, just about 80% to 20%. So it's quite different in Watergate in that obviously Watergate led to Nixon's downfall, Ford not being reelected, a chance for the Democratic Party, and then they handed it right back to Reagan in the 1980s. And so you have the third straight term of a Republican candidate. So it's nice talking to you, and I will see you later. Bye.